Mike Falvo, Census Taker by Ivan Bridgewater. Mike Falvo had been taking census data for the government for weeks. It was never ending. After a while, asking the same questions over and over became maddening. Some people were angry about being bothered. You just never knew when an angry person was going to slam a door in your face. It's not like Mike was to blame for what the government did. People would yell at him about the evil things the government did as if he wrote the laws. Mike didn't torture anybody. He never tapped anyone's phones. It just wasn't fair that people blamed him. Mike had just left a house with over 20 people living in it. They reported 3. Mike knew better, but that was what they put on the form, and Mike wasn't going to argue about it. When Mike asked, the homeowner said all the other people were visiting on vacation. Mike just rolled his eyes and went on. Mike's mind just kept going over the last couple of interviews. People had no idea what was going on around them. He'd talked to an elderly woman at 9 in the morning. Mike asked if he could throw some trash away, and he noticed that the trash container had cat food cans in it. The lady didn't have a cat. Mike was sure the little old lady was eating the cat food. She was on a fixed income, and the little old lady looked weak, poor, and ready to die. The next couple at 10 that morning were drug addicts. They didn't even try to hide it. Mike was there for almost 10 minutes before the wife noticed a syringe laying out and put it away. Poor people looked like skeletons waiting to be buried. Mike was pretty sure this would be their last census. It was hard to imagine that these young people were once healthy and had a future. They were just 20 years old, but they looked and acted as if they were 60. The family at 11 was well off. They had no idea of the misery around them. They really didn't care. The little old lady next door ate cat food, while these folks were so overweight that they would almost surely have heart attacks before they were 50 years old. That was almost noon, and it was getting warm outside. Mike was starting to sweat as he walked, and he hated that. As Mike approached the next house, he was shuffling his paperwork and not really paying attention. He stepped up to the door of the house, and before he could touch the doorbell, it rang out loudly. Almost instantly, the door opened, and there stood the devil. I suppose Mike must have been a little surprised, because he just stood there silently for a moment. Then the devil said, "May I help you?" After a while, Mike had gotten to where almost nothing caught him off guard. He quickly regrouped and said, "My name is Mike Falvo. I'm with the Census." The devil smiled and said, "Won't you come in?" Mike could see that this was the doorway to hell. The house looked normal on the outside, but as he looked over the devil's shoulder, Mike could see a cavern that went off into the distance for miles. Mike stepped through the door and passed the devil into the house. It was really warm in here, and right away Mike loosened his tie. He just wanted to get this over with, finish the day, and get home. The devil motioned to several chairs as Mike stepped in. As the devil closed the door, he said, "Won't you have a seat?" Mike said, "Thank you." Then he sat down in the offer chair and pulled out a new form so that he could get started. Now, I don't want to leave any doubt in your mind. The devil talking to Mike was about 7 foot tall. His skin was bright red and leathern looking. He had horns, cloven hooves, and a tail that was at least 6 feet long. I don't believe any of us would doubt it was the devil. Despite that, Mike calmly said, "May I have your name, please?" The beast simply said, "My name is Satan." Mike looked up and asked, "Is that your first or last name?" The devil gave him a dirty look, leaned over, and snatched the clipboard and paper away from Mike. He sat reading for a moment and then said, "I'm not doing this." Mike was used to that. He started with, "This is going to be used to help a lot of people in your neighborhood." Satan peered at Mike and dryly said, "Do you really think I care about them?" Mike fell back on Plan B, saying, "You're required by United States federal law to comply. It's your duty, just like filing taxes." The devil looked back down at the clipboard and mumbled, "Just like taxes." Suddenly, Satan snatched up the pen and started writing. In less than 7 minutes, he had completed the form. The average time is less than 10 minutes. Then he tossed the clipboard back at Mike. As Satan was writing, Mike looked around a little bit. He tried not to be obvious about it. He'd never been to hell, and he was curious. The first thing he noticed were the small demons crawling around. As the devil sat there, he casually snatched up one of the small demons and bit it in half. The demon was just bite-sized, and Satan offered one to Mike like he would a bacon sandwich. Mike waved it off and said, "I'm not allowed to accept gifts of food." Actually, Mike was rather surprised. Hell didn't seem that bad. Mike had been in some homes in the last month he would have considered a worse place to live in. Mike overrode the temptation to ask Satan to turn down the heat. All things considered, Mike was very collected and professional. Just a man doing his job. Mike picked up the clipboard and started to read over the form. Almost at once, Mike paused. He looked at Satan and asked, "Is Satan your first or last name?" The devil rolled his bloodshot eyes and said, "My last name." Mike said, "Very well, Mr. Satan. I don't believe we can use eternal as your age. I believe they really want a birth date and age." For just a moment, the devil tensed. Then he regained his composure. He looked at Mike and said, "What do most women answer for that question?" Mike said, 24, as he wrote it down. Mike did the math and wrote down the year of birth on the form. Then he looked up and said, "Am I to understand you're retired?" The devil's head snapped up and he said, "I didn't retire. I just became immaterial. Most pure evil comes from humans now. They don't need my help. Humans used to be all worried about evil. Now they embrace it." Satan's voice sounded a little cynical. He sat there for a second, then he said, "I used to take great pride in my work. Now I feel like I'm the garbage man. All I do is take out the trash." Satan's voice had reached a fever pitch. At the last moment he caught himself. He took a deep breath and seemed to steady himself. Then he said, "Please excuse me. I've been working through some anger issues." Mike took a deep breath and said, "I'm not here to judge you, sir." Satan started right back up, saying, "I used to be feared, respected, even worshipped. Now Hollywood mocks me. Humans watch television and music videos and go on the internet to fill up on evil. They don't need me. I have no purpose." The devil rose to his feet as he spoke the last sentence. His fists were clenched. The demons close by seemed to flee deeper into the shadows. Mike could see that this interview was going downhill. He had seen this sort of thing before. He was about to be blamed for something that wasn't his fault. He looked up and said, "Could we just stay focused on finishing and I'll get out of your hair?" Almost instantly, Mike regretted the choice of words. Satan has no hair on his head. If Satan caught the gaffe, he didn't react. His eyes seemed to be focused on some far distant point. He slowly sat back down and said, "I just don't understand where I went wrong." Mike kind of felt sorry for the devil. He thought for a moment and then said, "Perhaps you should look into a new career." Satan suddenly seemed to remember Mike was in the room. He focused his attention on the census man and said, "What are you talking about?" Mike knew he was messing up. He needed to stay focused on getting his job done. If he started helping every person he talked to, he would never get home. Mike chose his words carefully as he said, "A lot of people I talk to have told me they're going back to school and looking for a new career." Satan turned up his nose as if a dead animal had just entered the room. He looked at Mike and said, "I don't work well in a school environment. They made a movie about it once. The movie was horrible. The only thing worse would be if I really had to go to school." Mike nodded his head. He had seen the movie, and it was horrible. In a moment of inspiration, Mike asked, "Are you good at math?" Satan looked up with a smile and said, "I created math. There was no need to count things before me." Mike said, "I have friends at the IRS. Perhaps you should talk to them." Satan seemed to hesitate. He looked at Mike and said, "Have you ever noticed that nobody likes the tax man?" Mike thought about it. His IRS friends really didn't seem all that happy. Before he could say anything, Satan said, "I'm pretty fed up with everyone hating me. It's gone on for so long I had to have therapy. It helps, but I still have issues." His voice faltered and he started to tear up a little. Then he caught himself and looked at Mike saying, "I don't think I would like working for the IRS." Mike paused for a second. Then he made out his least thought-out suggestion. He looked the devil in the eyes and said, "Have you ever thought about politics?" Satan paused and seemed to take the comment in. Then he asked, "In the United States?" Mike thought for a moment. Could politics in the United States get any worse? In a moment of clarity, Mike said, "You would do well in U.S. politics." Satan sat thinking for a moment. A smile spread across his face. As a final touch, Mike said, "Run as an independent. That'll mess them all up." Satan really smiled at that. For a moment, Mike felt he had said the right thing. Then the smile slowly faded from the devil's face. He said, "Who am I kidding? The only people hated more than the tax people is the people in Congress." Mike tried to shift the conversation back to the census. He said, "When you say your minions are legion here on this line, what do you mean by that?" Satan was not interested in the form. He looked at Mike and said, "I would like to work around young people. They tend to be more happy." Mike had a vision of Satan in charge of a daycare center. He forced it from his mind before he could get it stuck there. He looked at Satan and said, "How about medical billing? I hear you can do it from your home on the computer. You can go to school that way." Satan rolled his eyes again and said, "There is way too much evil on the internet. Humans act like monsters. They do things even I wouldn't dream of." Mike was aware that the devil was correct. Most evil in the world is available on the internet. All the worst nightmares you can imagine are just waiting there, just a few simple clicks away. Mike tried to think of a job that would fit Satan and help him change his lifestyle. Insurance sales? Nope. Used cars? Nope. Mike even thought of Santa Claus, but the devil just wouldn't look right in the suit. Suddenly, Mike thought of ice cream. It just seemed to pop into his mind. The vision of Satan in an ice cream truck struck Mike funny, and he openly giggled for a moment. Now, I should mention right now that laughing at Satan is never a good ideal. He isn't reputed to have a good sense of humor. The devil snatched up another demon and bit off its head. He sat looking at Mike and said, "What's so funny?" The demon's twitching body flopped around in Satan's grasp as he sat there talking. Mike was aware that the interview was going very badly at this point. He decided it was best to just be honest, and he said, "I wondered if you'd ever driven an ice cream truck." He paused for a moment and then said, "The thought struck me funny." Satan said, "Ice cream truck," quietly to himself. It was as if he had never thought of it before. After a second, he repeated, "Ice cream truck," to himself and sat thinking. Mike waited patiently. He didn't want to interrupt the devil, but Mike had a busy day planned and daylight was a-wasting. He looked at Satan and said, "Well, if you'll just look this over and sign it, I'll get out of here." Once again, Satan looked up and said, "I have to admit, I never considered an ice cream truck before." He seemed to sit there thinking it over, and then he looked at Mike and said, "Would you buy ice cream from me?" Right away, Mike got a bad feeling. He suspected that the wrong answer might get him in trouble. He thought fast and said, "It depends." The devil looked at Mike oddly and then said, "It depends on what?" Mike looked at Satan and said, "On what kind of ice cream it is." Almost instantly, Satan said, "The best, of course." Mike rolled his eyes this time. He looked at Satan and said, "That's so subjective. Every person has a different favorite when it comes to ice cream." Satan was deep in thought this time. He just kept repeating, "Ice cream truck. On the third repeat, Mike pushed the clipboard back at Satan and said, "Would you sign here, please?" The devil absently said, "Sure." Then he took the clipboard and stood there. After a second, he signed the papers without even looking at them. Then he looked at Mike and said, "It's been very nice talking to you. You've given me a lot to think about. I've been sitting here for a long time, and I was getting a little depressed." He paused and then said, "Truthfully, I was thinking about destroying the human race with a plague, but now I realize that I've missed my calling." Satan looked right at Mike and said, "I was meant to sell ice cream." Mike paused for a moment. He debated what to say, and then he said, "I hear they deep fry ice cream now." Satan's eyes lit up. He quietly said, "Deep fried ice cream," to himself. He focused on Mike again, and then he said, "That even sounds sinful." Mike smiled and said, "I hope I helped you." The devil suddenly remembered his manners and stood up to see Mike to the door. The little demons ran away from underfoot as Satan opened the door to the outside and the blinding sunlight poured in. The devil stood there smiling as Mike stepped out, and he said, "You're a credit to the Census Bureau. You chose your career wisely." Mike turned, and just as Satan was shutting the door, he said, "Oh, I just work part-time for the census. I'm a Catholic priest by profession. Most people call me Father Mike." The look on Satan's face as the door snapped shut was priceless. Of course, Mike had no time to enjoy his success. He had more people to see. He stepped off the porch and walked down the sidewalk to the house next door. As Mike came around the corner of the next house, the first thing that caught his eye was the garage door. It was just almost closed, but there was a small crack left open. There was a glint of sunlight reflecting on metal coming through the crack in the door. Mike walked over and peeked in. There in front of him sat a flying saucer. Mike stood there really thinking about how to handle this. He'd already had a bad day, and he kept thinking about that old lady he was sure was eating cat food. There had to be some way to help her. Mike looked at his watch and decided he would come back after lunch. He would walk down to the local fast food place, get some sandwiches, and go get the old woman to eat some people food. Then he would come back and deal with the aliens. For Father Mike, census taker, it would just be another day on the job. And in the event you run into a guy that looks like Satan selling ice cream, don't laugh at him. He really doesn't like it when you laugh at him. The end.